Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Dare Dallas webinar. Now, first of all, thank you ever so much for everyone that's responded to the webinar last week. It was fantastic to hear such lovely comments. Now, this week, we are looking at our new series of articles and webinars entitled The £5,000 Spend. And the first person that's been very gracious in volunteering to come and talk to me this morning is my very, very long-standing friend, Ben Hanley. Ben, good morning. Lovely to see you.
Good morning, Alastair. How are you? Love to see you as always.
Very, very well indeed. First of all, Ben, before we come on to this, actually, just want to make a quick note of how successful the Wednesday Club was this week with the fantastic Simon Gillespie. Wasn't it great?
You enjoyed? Yeah, no, it was very good, I have to say. Well, Simon, for anybody who went, Simon is just, he's just fantastic restorer and has such an enormous depth of knowledge, but he's a bit of a showman and he loves showing his subject. He loves demonstrating what he does, because it's a very solitary job. And we had the crowd was very interactive. Everybody seemed to have a great time, ask questions, and if you know, with Simon, you ask questions. I mean, he feeds off it. So I thought it went very well.
Absolutely,
glad you enjoyed it.
I had a fantastic time, and I think I said to you on the night that I could have spent months there just listening to Simon talk, because it's just a wealth of information and a constant story about something else, which was just fascinating.
It's also a world, restoration is a world that a lot of people, if you're not actually in the trade as such, buying and selling paintings professionally, you don't really, you vaguely know what restoration is, but you don't actually, the nitty gritty of it. So to get into the studio and see the problems, the x-rays, when Simon uses white spirit to wipe across the surface so you can actually see into the painting, it's almost, it's magical. It's almost like alchemy. So I'm not surprised people enjoyed it, but anyway, hopefully
it's a cliche, but it's a window into a world that not many people get to see, which I think is the key to the Wednesday Club. So really looking forward to our next event. If you've not signed up to actually receive our invites for the Wednesday Club, please do get in touch, and we've got some fantastic things coming up over the next few months. But on to the subject in hand, Benjamin. So let's talk about your £5,000 spend. And you took a little bit of a different approach to how you would actually go about this, because I understand you were kind of toying with a few different ideas, but tell us how you came to your conclusion and what you would actually spend that £5,000 on.
Well, the premise is £5,000 is a lot of money in some respects. I mean, it takes a lot of money for the average person to save £5,000 and then feel comfortable to spend it. So that's the plus side of it. The downside is once you have a reasonable amount of money and you start, it gives you the opportunity to buy something a little bit special, rather than just something that's nice and goes on the wall and has no sort of depth to it. So when you start looking at artists that have a little bit more serious, £5,000 gets you just in the door. So you have to be a bit clever, I think. If you want to, you can either buy a wall filler that is very pretty, but it's just decorative by nature. But if you decide to maximize your £5,000, I think for me, I decided to go the auction route. I would always suggest if you have a little confidence, you know what you're looking for, you just look around in auctions. You can buy things a lot cheaper, and clearly a gallery is a commercial venture, therefore you pay for the postcode, you pay for the glass of champagne you have, and you also, but in fairness, you pay for the gallerist's knowledge and the fact that they stand behind the purchase. So you get what you pay for. But if you have a relatively limited budget and you do a little research yourself, you can get better value for money. You can extend the 5,000 by going to auction. So that's what I decided to do on one side. And then I decided to go for works on paper rather than try to get an oil, because again, I'm going for what I would perceive to be quite a decent artist, and oils, it's just out of the budget. But I thought to go for as fine a work on paper as I could by a better artist, rather than try to get, it's better to get as good as you. It's like anything, location with a property. The same with pictures. Get the best you can of whatever you're buying. So that was the sort of approach.
So I think for some of our viewers that might not be clued up in the way in which the hierarchy of artworks actually stand, we've got kind of a good middle ground thing with a work on paper. It's better than a print, but it's not quite an oil. Would you say that's an accurate portrayal?
Well, historically, there's always been a sort of hierarchy in that historically drawings have been looked down on. I mean, not now, but historically they were looked down on at, in the sort of the commercial trade, because they tended to be working drawings for the finished product, and clearly the finished product is the one that is framed and has the value in the gallery. Now, clearly that changes, that we have a bit more understanding of the creative process, and drawings have an entire market of their own. But in terms of a painting versus a drawing or watercolor, it's one step down. But for me, always get the best you can of whatever you're going for. If you're going for a limited edition print, get the best one of that. I mean, they're all individual and independent and totally credible art forms, but it's better, in my view, to get the best of one type rather than the worst of the next tier up.
Exactly, and I think at the moment works on paper, as you quite correctly pointed out, are good value in a lot of senses.
People can be very surprised when they see the cost differential between paintings and works on paper, or and then works on paper and prints as well, by very famous artists. I mean, even a Picasso, you can get Picasso prints for £10,000, which, well, again, it's a lot of money. I understand that. But, you know, relative to the name Picasso, you think you'd be spending hundreds of £1,000s to get a work of art by him, but you're not. So you can, if you pick and choose and be a little bit clever, you can get examples by very credible artists.
Now, speaking of very credible artists, the one person we're going to talk about today is not as well known as many of his contemporaries, really, to be honest, is he? However, still very well respected. So who is it that we're talking about today, Ben?
I'm going for somebody called Keith Vaughan. Now, Keith Vaughan is a modern painter rather than a contemporary. He died in 1977. He was born in 1912, so he's the classic mod Brit period. And a contemporary of Henry Moore, a very good friend of Graham Sutherland, of John Minton. So that sort of post-war contemporary period. But his work, he's sort of fallen under the radar. He's being picked up massively now, but I mean, he was always respected in his day, but the commercial market hasn't quite caught up with him. It's beginning to, and his very his highly finished oils and gouaches, they make into six figures, 150 to 300,000. But if you put that in context to Henry Moore, for example, like this work, that would be a well into the six figures. However, his works on paper vastly cheaper. I mean, you can get works on paper for £500-600 at auction, or you can get, if you're spending £5,000, you can get a lovely pen and ink wash drawing. So it's just in some respects, I think he's fallen under the radar because the Henry Moore, Frink, Hepworth, they were such big sort of international leviathans in the market and his work is much more sensitive and much more, the palette is muted. It's just more sensitive work. I don't think it's had the sort of attention that his contemporaries did.
I mean, looking at his life, obviously it was a fairly tortuous existence.
Yeah, it wasn't a happy life.
No, I mean, self-taught chap, and obviously the outbreak of the Second World War, which I think affected so many people of this kind of period. I mean, we go back to last week when Jonathan and I were talking about Terry Frost. Obviously, it changed his world. Strangely, I mean, Keith Vaughan was at Camberwell. I'm assuming it must have been around the same time as Terry Frost.
100%. I mean, they were all in a bubble, so to speak. They were all their contemporaries. And remember, the art market, the art world in those days was much smaller than it is now. And the actual commercial art market was tiny. So they all knew each other. Yeah. But you talk about the war. I mean, it massively affected him. He was a conscientious objector and came out as a conscientious objector. So he was part of the ambulance crew, and then he was locked up and interned for his objections. So that was a very brave thing to do, bearing in mind anybody who felt that strongly were considered cowards, etc. So it's a very interesting thing.
Now, in terms of kind of where he went after his life as a painter, I mean, was he, at the time of being a well-respected artist, was he a commercially viable artist?
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, he started off, he wasn't trained as such, but he went into the commercial art field, and had conducted an apprenticeship. So he worked, and you can see in a way in his work, it's quite graphic. It's very linear, and you can see the graphic nature of it. It's not three-dimensional at all. So when I think in the just before the World War II, 1939, he basically left the agency he was in, and he became a commercial artist, and he was represented by the Redfern Gallery, which was one of the finest galleries well, it still is in London, but it was one of the cutting edge galleries in London at the time, and represented one now the top moderate artists. So he made his name as a full-time credible artist. He had part-time work as a teacher in the Slade, but no, he was, and he exhibited internationally. He was in Mexico, he was in America. So he had a very good reputation. The reason I'm choosing him or saying that he's a good buy is the commercial market currently he's been slightly left behind. I mean, not entirely, of course, but I think he's undervalued.
Do you I mean, obviously, for those who don't know, he obviously, again, going back to his somewhat tortured life, he was a gay man, yeah. And in this period of time, it would have been incredibly difficult for him to be not necessarily a successful artist, but to be kind of, out there.
I mean, any gay guy in those days, they lived two lives. I mean, it was totally unacceptable. I mean, it was illegal, but I mean, even just forget about the legalities of the day. It was you couldn't have an open life. So he had that sort of struggle with his sexuality. He suffered from depression. I must say, I'm not painting him as being a happy soul, but there's
his work doesn't necessarily reflect that, though. It's not.
No, but there's a sensitivity to his work, and his work isn't happy work, but it's not dour work. I just think there's an elegance and sensitivity to his line drawings. There's a sensitivity to his landscapes, and they're just lyrical works. And in a way, maybe they're not punchy, loud works. Maybe that's also why from the 70s, 80s, 90s, his prices didn't catch up with his contemporaries. But
how much have they changed then? I'm going to bring up now some of the actual sketches that we've been talking about in terms of where you can actually be in the market. And I mean, if we look at something like this, does this fall within in the bracket for what you could actually spend on?
That would probably be at the top end. That would probably, at auction, it would go in at 4 to 6, or maybe 3 to 5, and you make about 6.
Okay.
So, but it's a highly finished drawing. I mean, it'll be about that size. So put on some other ones.
Yeah, let's pull up another one now,
and we'll see. Yeah, now that would probably cost you $3,000, $2,000 at auction.
But it's almost like a study. It's almost like a study.
Yeah. And I mean, clearly a lot of his work is figure based, male figure based, but a lot of it is abstracted. So there's no, it's not erotic or anything like that. So if you go back to, did you show that there's highly finished work? I'm not sure. Did you show it before the standing figures? I mean, for example, this would be the top tier of his work. It's totally outside the budget. This is an oil on canvas. But it's you can see the link between that and the study. Sorry,
the figures, the one that
yes, you can see the relationship. So this would be well into the 6 figures. So totally out of our budget, but you can see the relationship between that and his interest in in figures and composition of figures.
Let's just go back to another work on paper. Now, yeah. Are these items readily available? Do they come to market very often?
Yes. I mean, clearly, the better the work, the less rare they are. But again, at our budget, we're not talking about buying masterpieces. We're talking about getting as good as you can get from a very credible artist. So yeah, I mean, he comes up often. I mean, in terms of coming up often, one of the ways you can tell that his market and commercial market is different to his reputation, but his commercial market is going up. If you go to this sort of the main art fairs, you see his work much more on the major gallery stands, which is always indicative of a rise in demand, because every square inch of an art fair is being paid for. So you can't put something that isn't being sold, isn't saleable or commercial. So if you see an artist who hasn't normally been on it. It doesn't appear very often on, as I said, expensive gallery stands. It tends to be indicative of a rise in the market or interest in the artist.
Do you think, because of the rising market of his contemporaries in the last 20 years and the fact that he's been left behind, do you think he's almost got that kind of appeal as maybe not a lost artist, but somebody who is potentially bubbling under, shall we say?
It's exactly that. I mean, if people always look, I mean, it's like the housing market. It's a strange analogy, but Chelsea's expensive. People can't afford Chelsea, they move to Fulham. Fulham becomes expensive. All the neighbourhoods become expensive because the one or two areas are sought after. Same with artists of a certain generation. Some the market just buys into, and they make stratospheric money. Clearly, at a certain stage, one looks around it to see who the contemporaries were that are of a similar level and quality, but maybe didn't at that moment rise. And it's a situation like that.
So is Keith Vaughan the Kennington of the art world, Ben?
He could be indeed, absolutely. Bearing in mind, I live in Kennington. Thank you very much. Yes. Look, I mean, his work might not appeal to everybody, but I just think I like works on paper. I like to see the hand of man just drawing and creating. I very much like his contemporary Graham Sutherland, who again.
Yep.
They have you can see an influence on both.
Yeah.
They were both great friends. And Graham Sutherland again, I think he's also slightly undervalued because again, I don't think he's a showy, flashy artist. So
absolutely. I mean, there are so many from that period that took off and are still huge. And we've discussed a few of them, and with you and obviously with Jonathan as well. But these ones that are bubbling under, and I think this £5,000 spend really does kind of emphasize that you can get some stuff out there for what is not a huge amount of money for an original piece of artwork by one of these incredibly well discussed and well respected artists. So it's a fantastic
100% agree. I think, look, in the art market, we all get used to big numbers. And in the reality of the situation, £5,000 is not a small amount of money for the average person. So I think a little research, if somebody wants to buy something, always buy what they like, by the way. Ignore everything I'm saying. If you buy what you like, this is a personal thing. But then do your research, and it's surprising what can be got if you look carefully. Clearly, if you're looking at living artists, it's slightly more difficult because they tend to be controlled by one gallery or two galleries, and particularly if they're contemporary, and therefore it's not always as easy to get on the secondary market. But if you go to the previous generation, which they've got the pedigree, so you can see they've got track record, which is always good if you have an eye to an investment. It's always good to see whether or not they're on the up or whatever. But just do your research, and don't be scared to go to an auction house. Don't be scared to go to a gallery. I'm not knocking galleries at all, but £5,000 gets you through the door, so you want to maximize it.
But obviously, going to an auction house, there is a small degree of risk that you wouldn't have from buying from a gallery. So, I mean, again, it is always recommended that you make sure you get a qualified opinion on those items. Even at £5,000, it's not an insignificant amount to throw away. So make sure you have a correct opinion on these pieces before you buy them.
100%. As I said, when you buy at auction, you are using your eye rather than the gallery's eye. Now, clearly, an auction house, assuming we're talking about the credible auction houses and not sort of clearance auction houses, they do stand by what they're selling. So it's not as though you're buying out of the blue. You have that. If they catalogue it as by Vaughan, it is by Vaughan. But you have to check the condition. You have to check the relative quality of it, etc. That's up to you, and you need to be comfortable with what you're going to spend. But personally, I think if you put a little effort into it, you get more out of it.
Ben, it's been another fantastically fascinating discussion with you again today. So thank you ever so much for taking the time to talk to me about such as I say, an underrated and fascinating artist. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you for our next instalment of the Dare Dallas webinar, which will be with you in another fortnight. And if you haven't checked out the programme for the next few months as to what we're going to be doing in terms of webinars, articles, and of course, Ben's baby, the Wednesday Club, then please do get in touch and we'll be able to tell you exactly what we're doing for the next few weeks. So thanks very much again, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll see you all very soon. Goodbye.